Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and today's topic is I'm absolutely mesmerized and I'm absolutely shocked by the things happening in the United States for almost a year since Mr. Trump has been elected to his post as the United States president, and that kind of the Russian meddling is going on, and that is absolutely crazy, and some stupid things happening. And today's BBC article just says that Trump directed hush money, and it has been said by his ex-lawyer Michael Cohen, and that crazy hysteria about Mr. Trump is continuing right away, and that is really outrageous. U.S. President Donald Trump's former lawyer Michael Cohen has pleaded guilty in Manhattan court to violating campaign finance laws, and he said he did so all at the direction of the candidate for the principal purpose of influencing their election. Mr. Cohen's admission was related to hush money paid to Mr. Trump's alleged mistresses. The 51-year-old admitted 8 counts, including tax and bank fraud, in a plea deal with prosecutors. And Mr. Trump ignored questions about Mr. Cohen as he arrived on Tuesday evening for a pre-scheduled rally in West Virginia. The White House also declined to comment. Uh, it's quite interesting how long that will continue and how long that will just torment the White House occupant, Mr. Trump. If you think that he is he has he has had some connections with their Kremlin operatives or those VIP people, then why do you think that he is apt to exercise his duties as the United States president? Perhaps you've got to remove him from his post and initiate the process of impeachment. He is more than a year already just executing the duties of the United States president. He's an acting president and the head of the nation and the head of the military, and that's why that kind of the process is always going on. And my personal opinion is that it has been initiated by the Democrats and by their loser candidate, by Hillary Clinton, by her milieu, and because they were so much eager to win that election, and that is, I think, what has led to all that hysteria around Trump, around Russian meddling, about that the Russian hackers invaded uh, democratic democratic databases and tilted the election toward Mr. Trump, and the initiation of the sanctions against Russia, uh, about some two stages of sanctions were just put toward Russia, and that's why it's kind of it's kind of a crazy things right away going on in America. The plea came as a jury in Alexandria, Virginia, convicted former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort of bank and tax fraud charges. Mr. Cohen said he had been directed by a candidate for federal office, presumed to be Mr. Trump himself, to break federal election laws. If you think that he's a lawbreaker and even federal lawbreaker, then why why those why those departments don't initiate his impeachment and aimed at removing Mr. Trump from his job and just starting a new election campaign and then getting Hillary Clinton through that crazy stuff and through that crazy job, get back to take Mr. Trump's post. Do you think it's going to be okay? And the indictment against Mr. Cohen carries up to 65 years in prison. Wow, my goodness. But his plea deal includes a much more lenient custodial sentence of up to 5 years and 3 months, said Judge William Poley. Mr. Cohen has pleaded guilty to, and I'm enumerating that: 5 counts of tax evasion, 1 count of making false statements to a financial institution, 1 count of willfully causing an unlawful corporate contribution, 1 count of making an excessive campaign contribution at the request of a candidate or campaign. His sentencing was set for 12 December. He was released after posting a bail of $500,000. Reports in court said Mr. Cohen's voice quivered as he answered routine questions from the judge. He was asked whether he had consumed any alcohol or drugs before making his guilty plea. Mr. Cohen told the judge he had only had a glass of 12-year-old Glenlivet, a single malt scotch, with dinner the night before. And another headline with this article just says that I don't know how to be able to show that because it reflects so badly. I can't do that. My goodness. Okay, okay, it's better that I read that out loud. Okay, lock him up, Nick Brain, BBC News. This was the legal summer blockbuster that journalists had been waiting months for, and in terms of courtroom drama and potential political impact, the appearance of Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's one-time Mr. Fix-It, didn't disappoint. It was his admission that he knowingly broke campaign finance laws. That was by far the most politically explosive. My goodness, I can imagine what kind of things are happening there in the United States, and that is extremely crazy. That is out of any logical consequence and unimaginable. The acting president is presumed to be a kind of an outlaw, a kind of a criminal and lawbreaker. This kind of the BBC articles just indicate about that. They think it's okay. It's a crazy thing because there is kind of the in the United States by the Congress, by the Democrats and the Republicans and the Senate and Congress, there's kind of a constant infighting which is on the way since Mr. Trump initiated back in 2015 his campaign while he was on his campaign trail. Well, though Mr. Cohen has admitted guilt, he has not agreed as part of the plea agreement to cooperate with federal prosecutors either in New York or those working in the investigation led by special counsel Robert Mueller. He left court to chance of lock him up from a few of his fellow New Yorkers. What did prosecutors say? Speaking to reporters outside court, a prosecutor said Mr. Cohen's crimes were particularly significant because he is a trained lawyer. Robert Kuzani, the deputy U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, said Mr. Cohen disregarded that tradition, and decided that he was above the law, and for that he will pay, a very, very serious price. Federal investigators have been scrutinizing Mr. Cohen's business activities for months, including a tax business owned by him and his family. Mr. Kazani said Mr. Cohen had failed over the past 5 years to report income on $1.3 million from his tax business and $100,000 from brokerage commissions and $200,000 from consultancy fees. He said Mr. Cohen had provided sham invoices to the campaign for legal fees that he allegedly provided last year. The prosecutor also said Mr. Cohen had sought reimbursement for his excessive campaign contribution by submitting the bogus invoices to the campaign. The plea deal does not necessarily entail that Mr. Cohen is cooperating against the pro-president. It could simply mean he has agreed to plead guilty in order to spare both sides a lengthy trial. I'm sorry, a lengthy trial. Why was hush money paid? That's perhaps about Mr. Trump. Porn star Stormy Daniels says she was paid $130,000 by Mr. Cohen just days before the 2016 election to keep quiet about an affair she says she had a decade earlier with Mr. Trump. In May, the president admitted the president admitted he had reimbursed Mr. Cohen for payment after having earlier denied any knowledge of it. Mr. Cohen also recorded conversation with Mr. Trump 2 months before the election in which they discussed buying the rights to a kiss and tell story by former Playboy model Karen McDougal, who says she had an affair with Mr. Trump. Perhaps a whole of the people, all those ladies, all those models who had some kind of been meeting or just ever came across Mr. Trump, they'll be kind of through back door and through the behind the scenes manipulation. They'll be forced or manipulated uh, to just testify against Mr. Trump, so as uh, to to endanger his, so to say, his presidency overall, so that to make it easier for those opponents of Mr. Trump to be able uh, just in a just in a very short period of time to be they want him out of the office. Perhaps that is initiated and manipulated and perhaps lobbied heavily through some indirect contacts by those around Mrs. Clinton. Perhaps let's think about that. That her defeat during the presidential election back in 2016, she isn't going to forgive that blow delivered by Mr. Trump, and she's going to do all in her power to force him out through any means, through those ladies, through that MacDougal or something like that. They are just gathering that kind of the testimony, which can prove that Mr. Trump is the not the man who is going to lead his country. Okay, let's put out some details from this BBC article. Karen McDougal, who says she had an affair with Mr. Trump. Miss McDougal is referred to in court documents as woman number one, while Miss Daniels is woman number two and an adult film actress. Undisclosed payments to bury embarrassing stories about the political candidate can be treated as a violation of U.S. campaign finance laws. The lawyer from Ms. Daniels, who is suing both Mr. Trump and Ms. Cohen for defamation, tweeted that today's development boosts her case against the president. Another headline tells that it could get worse for Mr. Trump. Back in July, Donald Trump tweeted that Michael Cohen might be trying to make up stories in order to get himself out of an unrelated jam. It turns out, however, the jam is very much related to the president. Mr. Trump has denied having any knowledge of pre-election payments to women alleging that they had an affair with him. On Tuesday, in a Manhattan courtroom, Mr. Cohen effectively said that the president is lying. The candidate, that is too bad. Those people who were in contact or were working together with Mr. Trump before he became president, and now they are seen claiming and testifying in the court of Manhattan that he has been lying, and that is not a good truth testimony. That is not a that is not favorable to Mr. Trump. The candidate is said had ordered the transactions that made it that the undisclosed payment constituted a violation of campaign finance law. It's bad. It could get worse. As Mr. Trump's long-time lawyer, fixer, and business associate who was involved in 2015 and 2016 negotiations to build the Mr. Trump Tower in Moscow, among other dealings. Mr. Cohen may have information of interest to Robert Mueller's special counsel team now that he is facing prison time. Mr. Mueller and company could come calling again. For the past few months, Mr. Cohen taken an increasingly adversarial increasingly adversarial attitude toward Mr. Trump, a man for whom he once said he would take a uh, bullet. Now he is implicating the president in the commission of a campaign-released crime. Is this just that start with a sentencing hearing set for the end of this year? Mr. Cohen has plenty of time to think about next moves. Okay, how did Trump and Cohen's lawyers react? Another sub headline: Mr. Cohen's lawyers, Lanny Davis, said after Tuesday's court hearing that his client was living up to his vow in an interview last month to put his loyalty to family and country above his old boss. Mr. Davis said today he stood up and testified under oath that Donald Trump directed him to commit a crime by making payments to two women for the principal purpose of influencing an election. If those payments were a crime for Michael Cohen, then why wouldn't they be a crime for Donald Trump? But Rudy Giuliani, a lawyer for Mr. Trump, told reporters, quote, there is no allegation of any wrongdoing against the president in the government's charges against Mr. Cohen. It's clear that the prosecutor noted Mr. Cohen's actions reflect a pattern of lies and dishonesty over a significant period of time, End of quote. And the question, who is Michael Cohen? The people around Donald Trump, how did the case come about? Mr. Cohen worked. Mr. Cohen worked at the Trump organization for more than just a decade, and continued to serve as Mr. Trump's personal lawyer and fixer after the election. The FBI seized a number of files in April from Mr. Cohen's office and a hotel room used by him in New York. They conducted their rapid reportedly following a tip-off from the team of special counsel Robert Mueller. Mr. Mueller is investigating whether Trump campaign aides colluded with alleged Russian attempts to sway the 2016 presidential election his way. The FBI swoop outraged Mr. Trump, who complained that it was an inconceivable violation of attorney general privilege. The president has distanced himself from Mr. Cohen since he left his post as his personal lawyer in May. Yeah, there's a lot of dirty things circulating around Mr. Trump, and he has got to take care of those affairs that's just happening around him right now. Let's wait and see what's gonna happen sometime later. Please, if you've got it, if you got any special information, any of your views and ideas, please write down just below this video what you think, what's going to happen to Mr. Trump, and how he's going to just get out of that mess, which is just revolving, which has surrounded him right now, and his close people, some kind of the investigation and some kind of the court cases initiated, and that is dirty business. Please, if you have any thoughts and any ideas, please put your thoughts down, and we'll discuss that sometime later, or put your own video down below this one, or put a link to that if you think that anything special is going to happen to the presidency of Mr. Trump. Thank you for watching this video. Until then.